He was wrongfully accused of sexual assault of his 3-year-old daughter, then 3-year-old daughter. He was jailed, incarcerated. He was never charged. He's here to talk about the incident and his life after. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Look for Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on youtube.com, and be sure to subscribe. Like everything we do, it is free. Look for and subscribe to Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on YouTube, where you'll find great police videos and episodes of the podcast. Best of all, it is free. Contact us from great state of Florida, where I happen to be. We have Dean Tong on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Dean is an interesting story, very interesting story. He was wrongfully accused, and I think it's important to say that, wrongfully accused of sexual assault with his 3-year-old daughter, who was then 3 years old. He was incarcerated. He was in jail for 2 weeks, got bail. Eventually, the charges were dropped. He's written a book called Elusive Innocence, Survival Guide for the Falsely Accused. He's written multiple books. That's one of them. And his website is abuse-excuse.com. That's abuse-excuse.com. Dean, thanks so much for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, talking about, admittedly, a very difficult topic.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me, John.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And I want people to, and I know this is difficult, I'm speaking to the listeners, I want you to suspend your judgment. Do not make judgments. And I struggle with this as much as anybody else, and I'm sure there was a time you did too. This is a situation where I'm a father, I'm a retired police officer, and I was always trained. We always believe the victim. We always investigate a crime until evidence shows otherwise. Are you a judgy type person? Were you before you are now?
Was I then more judgmental than I am now?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say. When someone says to me they were accused of sexual assault, I'm like, yep. Oh, when there's smoke, there's fire. And right away, I don't think there's anything wrong. I know better now, but when I was a younger man, that was not the case.
Yeah, so I was involved in a very high conflict divorce and custody battle back in 1985, and shortly thereafter, I was accused of digital vaginal penetration of my 3-year-old daughter.
Uh-huh.
I've always been a heterosexual guy, never interested in little kids, including, of course, my own DNA.
Right.
With that said, it did go to court. A judge threw it out. This was months before I was arrested. So there was 2 allegations in 1985. The first one, the court threw it out and basically said, this is ridiculous. She can't even cognitively tell me what her name is. So the judge threw it right out. Months later, I found myself guilty by association. Where there was smoke, there was fire.
Right.
Because the second allegation surfaced, like you, John, as a former law enforcement officer, the police immediately believed children don't lie. They're not mistaken when they allege sexual assault. Must be believed and protected at all costs. I was arrested. I had no bail. My lawyer was very expensive in Jacksonville, Florida. And he basically came into the jail cell and asked me 4 words. Did you do it? And I said, no, of course not. He said, that's all I need to know. And from there, 2 weeks later, I got out. He got me a bail bond of $25,000. My family had to put up 10% of the same, $2,500 in collateral. I took a polygraph and obtained a no deception indicated. I went beyond that and went through a penile plethysmograph, also known as basically a sex polygraph, because we know from the science sexual interest precedes sexual assault. I passed that test as well with a PhD psychologist in Georgia. So I had a nice package that I wasn't lying and that I had no sexual interest in prepubescent female children.
Right.
It didn't matter. The state of Florida kept me under wraps for 15 months till the end of 1986, when they finally threw it out and said, we're doing a no file. We're not going to file a information against you in the state attorney's office.
So they didn't file charges at all.
Right. They just had me under probable cause arrest for 15 months. And, of course, when I got out of jail, John, a lot of people don't know this. When I got out of jail after serving the 2 weeks, the media was there. They did a perp walk on me.
Yeah.
It was all over the 6 o'clock news in Jacksonville, Florida.
I agree. I believe, listen, I've never been through anything like this in my life. And we'll talk about the before, during, and after in a moment. But for me, I would imagine that, first of all, where do these allegations of sexual assault come from?
Yeah, so, again, we were in a very volatile custody battle. I had a lot of evidence that my wife was going to be ruled unfit by the family court, and eventually she was. Unfortunately, I was basically blindsided by these allegations, and of course, they are so reprehensible and heinous when they happen. The court raised its eyebrows, and the state attorney's office and everybody else, and I'm immediately perceived as guilty and basically presumed guilty, having to prove a negative in my innocence. I didn't know that's the way it worked in America.
Well, we're taught that guilty until proven innocent, but that's the other way around.
Well, not with this charge.
No,
not with this charge.
With this charge,
this is the exception to the rule.
You were considered. Hang on. You were considered guilty until you're proven innocent.
Yeah, this is the exception to the rule. This charge.
Right.
This is the horse of a different color.
Right.
And I didn't know that at the time. Remember now, John, this was 1985. We didn't have computers and internet and iPhones and iPods and iPads and AI. We didn't have any of that stuff, and so there weren't many tools or resources for people wrongly accused to be able to help themselves or their lawyers to help them.
I got to ask you this question. When you said the allegations came across, I would think that would hit you like a ton of bricks.
Oh, it did. It did. And I didn't know that my ex-wife, at the time she was my wife, we weren't divorced until May of 1985. After the first allegation was thrown out, then we got divorced like 3 months later, and then the second allegation, we're legally divorced now, and I'm going to jail. But the point is, this is going to wind up to be a very nasty custody battle had I been able to litigate it in family court where, depositions would have been taken and all that stuff. And it just never came to fruition because these allegations basically outweighed everything else. So she took my daughter to a therapist. And apparently the therapist started asking my daughter leading, suggestive, direct, repeated questions.
Right.
And this is a kid who couldn't really decipher truth from a lie or fantasy from reality at 3.5 years old, and basically led my daughter down that road where I was up against a wall. And, of course, my ex-wife at the time, she was still my wife, at the first allegation in early 1985, she was with another man. So she was living with another man while I'm still married. I'm sure the two of them were coaching my daughter to set me up in some type of a conspiring scheme to throw me under the bus.
We're going to take a short break on that note. We're talking about Dean Tong. He was wrongfully accused of sexual assault of his then 3-year-old daughter. He's written multiple books. One, the most recent one, is called Survival, Guide for the Falsely Accused. Elusive Innocence is the name of the book. And his website is abuse-excuse.com. It's abuse-excuse.com. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. There's only one official Facebook page for the show. Do a search on Facebook for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And be sure to click like. Current conversation with Dean Tong on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Dean, well, I'll put it to you bluntly, he was wrongfully accused of sexual assault of his 3-year-old daughter, then 3 years old. He was incarcerated, did time in jail, got bail. The charges, they weren't even filed. He was released without charge. He's written multiple books. One is called Elusive Innocence, Survival Guide for the Falsely Accused. And his website is abuse-excuse.com. It's abuse-excuse.com. I got to ask you this question, and I'm almost shudder to say this because I hear some people say this. The courts, they have, let's just say, a leniency towards the women and not men. Is that correct in your point of view?
Especially in this issue, John, I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
And and I want to say this. You're able to talk about this in almost a way like you're talking about someone else. Is that by design, or is that something you learn? Because quite honestly, I don't think I can talk about it emotionally. I get angry. Yeah.
Well, I became suicidal, John. This was a very traumatic experience for me, and I had ideations of hurting myself, and I had to go see a psychologist. So I did that, and I'm now leapfrogging to 1987, where I saw a PhD psychologist for 6 months in treatment. It was just very harrowing for me. So while I defeated the criminal case, if you will, the family court said I was no better good enough for no better than supervised chaperone monitored visitation. I had to see my children supervised. This included my son, who I wasn't even accused of abusing.
Uh-huh. I get that. And here's my look. My way of thinking, I know, is skewed, totally skewed. I do not want the state of Florida or anybody being involved in my business. I just don't. Is that fair for you?
Well, yeah, it's the government, big brother, Uncle Sam, and certainly when you're up against the probable cause arrest charges, as you know better than anybody, John, you're the government, and the accused is just a taxpayer. That's all he or she is, and you can call this a gender feminist type of allegation. You could say that my ex-wife had motive and method and means and opportunity to get equity at law and court by wielding my daughter as a pawn, weapon, and tool to do so, whatever you want to call it. The ingredients were right there for her to make that cake, which was going to bury me. And this thing buried me financially, emotionally, physically, spiritually. It's just surreal.
One of the questions, and we're fast forward, we'll go to your story in a moment. I would think that, and I'm going to phrase this as a former question, I would think that you would still, I would still be very defensive about this. I'd walk around with the mindset of I've got something to prove. Do you feel that way?
I can't, John, because I graduated, if you will, became a different individual, and I'm now an expert witness in court on these types of cases. So I have to now remain objective, independent, neutral, and impartial at all forks in the road in all of my cases.
Was it fair to say that that didn't happen by accident? It required a lot of work to get from point A to point B?
Oh, it was climbing Mount Everest. I had to go get a master's degree. I became, of course, multi-published. I have consulted now on cases in all 50 states. I've testified as an expert witness 80 times in 20 states, obviously about a dozen times here in Florida. I'm north of Tampa. But the reality is, I'm the guy the state loves to hate now. Worse than ever, because I stand between an accused pedophile and a prison cell.
Well, here's the thing. When you say you accuse someone of being a pedophile, I can't think of a whole lot of other things that are more serious than that. Look, I'll phrase it this way. There are people I've met who have done homicides. They made they had three bad minutes in their life. They were great people before, great people afterwards. But when it comes to pedophiles, and there's no redeeming them.
No, I get it, and I have no sympathy for pedophiles. In fact, I'm all for Governor DeSantis bringing back the death penalty for rape of a child under 12. I support that. But the reality is, it's not what you know, it's not what you think you know, it's what you can prove in a court of law.
There's a big difference.
In these cases, in my case, it was he said, she said, what a child said. It was child hearsay. There was no medical evidence. There was no trauma. The trauma was to me, not to my child. Of course, at the time, she wasn't undergoing bedwetting or nightmares or flashbacks or emotional dysregulation or psychosomatic issues, stomach aches and headaches and all this stuff. She didn't have any of that. On the other hand, I was suicidal. So the state doesn't care about that. You know that as a former law enforcement officer. And look, in these cases, they're out for a conviction. They want to get a conviction because they're pouring their time and resources into a case. There are a lot of professionals that get involved. DCF, which back in '85 was called HRS, as you know, John. And so I was up against a mountain of people and professionals who believed I was guilty because my child said this. It must be true. Well, there are factors governing a child's credibility, fortunately. In Florida, those factors didn't come to fruition until 1994, almost 10 years after my case was in court, known as the Townsend factor, State v. Townsend, 1994, Florida Supreme Court. So a child has to be deemed to be spontaneous, reliable, and trustworthy before a judge or a jury can find that same child credible in a he said, she said a case that's a war of words, and there's no physical medical evidence.
And I would think that this is the cop part of me. I would think that, look, when it comes to, and I'm paraphrasing this, there's legitimate claims of sexual abuse. I'm not disputing that, and they're readily apparent. But when there is a divorce and there is a custodial parent that is making accusations, my BS alarm starts to go off.
Yeah, well, in today's world and today's climate, John, perhaps Dean Tong in 2025 wouldn't have come under arrest because of the gravity of the child custody conflict that was going on at the same time in family court, that the state knew that all of that baggage, all of that drama from the family court case would come to fruition in the criminal case, and the jury would be privy to all of that.
And by the way, I retired from police work a long time ago. One of the things that we were taught early on, and you could almost sense that there is motives behind people when the way you report crimes. But we were always taught that when a 5-year-old, for example, tells you something happened sexually, believe them, because your mind doesn't think that way. And then you follow the evidence. If there's evidence to pursue. If there's no evidence that tells you the crime didn't commit, then you've got to act that way.
Right, and unfortunately, John, perhaps the shortcoming of police officers and DCF, child protective personnel and intake workers, is they're not aware of the scientific studies that were authored by Dr. Stephen Ceci back in the 90s. Again, after the time I got arrested, I didn't have the benefit of all this research, but there are many studies that have been conducted. Kids that are so suggestible and impressionable, if they could talk about the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, and Peter Pan and Easter Bunny, they could talk about how Daddy touched my
right.
And this happened in many studies that Dr. Ceci and his associate, Dr. Maggie Brook, co-authored and were published in the 90s. One study where an actual pediatrician was accused of putting his fingers and objects in the little girl's genitalia.
We'll take a short break on that note, and we're talking about Dean Tong. He was wrongfully accused of sexual assault of his then 3-year-old daughter. He was incarcerated for 2 weeks, spent time in jail. The charges were eventually dropped. They weren't only just dropped, they weren't pursued at all. He's author of the book Elusive Innocence, Survival Guide for the Falsely Accused, and his website is abuse-excuse.com. It's abuse-excuse.com. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com. That's letradio.com. There you'll find episodes of the show available as a podcast after airing on radio. And they're always free. There's 700 plus episodes on there right now. There's blogs. Get information about our sponsors. All that and much more at letradio.com. Again, the website is letradio.com.
The days are longer, the calendar is filling up, and I want to feel as good as this beautiful summer weather. That's why I've been loving Groons. It's one daily pack of gummies that covers my greens, vitamins, minerals, and even has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber, so I don't need to juggle a complicated wellness routine on top of everything else. They taste amazing, they're easy to toss in my bag on the go, plus they're vegan, gluten-free, and HSA and FSA, eligible for reimbursement. Save up to 52% off with code PODCAST at Groons.co. That's code PODCAST at GRUNS.co.
During a conversation with Dean Tong on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, Dean is contacted from Florida. He was wrongfully accused of sexual assault of his then 3-year-old daughter. He was incarcerated. He was jailed. He made bail. The charges were not even pursued. They were not only just dropped, they were not pursued by the state. This never occurred. This never happened. When I say wrongfully accused, he was wrongfully accused. No charges were ever filed. He's written multiple books. One is called Elusive Innocence, Survival Guide for the Falsely Accused, and his website is abuse-excuse.com, abuse-excuse.com. Dean, I'm the father of 2 daughters, and I never could imagine this. And I went through divorce. I went through all that, and we never had this sort of accusations going on. But be honest with you, I still walk around thinking about some stuff from police work where I feel defensive, and I cannot talk about it without being emotional. You had to be caught out of left field with this.
Yeah, it was very difficult, John, for me to segregate my emotions during the time that the litigation of the case was ongoing, trying to restore my family rights in order to see my children unsupervised, unchaperoned. That took about 4 years to do so. So very traumatic for me. We didn't have resources. You had maybe the National Organization for Men, NOM, you could reach out to. They might be able to give you some referrals to some attorneys. But there really was no resources for help. There were no therapists, really. I did find a PhD, like I said earlier, in Georgia, who saw me for 6 months and was trying to work with the DCF people in Florida to try to get me some more visitation. They didn't really help, the DCF. So they were of the same mindset as the police officers. If a child said this, it must have happened.
Right, I get that. But there's a missing thing is there's got to be evidence to support that claim. Otherwise, it's just a claim.
Well, and of course, there's a forensic interview, John. That the child is always taken to the child protection team, as it's called in Florida, for that forensic interview, and that's basically the smoking gun evidence for the state, right? If the kid repeats to the forensic interviewer what she told mommy and maybe a police officer that Daddy touched my, that DVD of that interview will be played for the judge, for the jury in real time at the trial. Now, with that said, had the state formally charged me, and by the way, I was arrested for capital sexual battery, which back then, today, it's life in prison in Florida without the possibility of parole. You are done. Stick a fork in you. The point I'm trying to make is, had they taken me to trial, it would have been 3-4 more years until my daughter reached the age of 6 or 7, where she could competently testify in a court of law against me, where I'm going to be afforded my Sixth Amendment right to confrontation of my accuser.
I got to ask this question, and it's a painful question to ask. All that you've been through, do you have a relationship with your daughter now?
I do not.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask you to elaborate on that. I would find that personally to be very difficult for me.
It's I don't like to think about it like it just never happened, the eradication of my daughter from my life. But she was mainly the one who didn't want a relationship. I tried to smooth our relationship out after she emancipated and turned 18. It worked for a little while. We would do a few things together. We went fishing one time on a boat. We go to have a few beers at a restaurant, have dinner. But the reality is, I guess the uncertainty in her mind as she was growing up, because so many people interviewed her and prodded her that something must have happened. Her belief system became such that she was confused.
Yeah,
she didn't know what she didn't know. She didn't know. I know, and I tried to casually get her to read over the court documentation. She never did, as far as I know.
Plus, you've got to, and I don't want to belabor this point, but you've got to counteract the accusations of someone else that means so much to them as well, and it's a difficult situation to find yourself in.
Yes, and tragically, John, what I haven't told you or the audience is her mother passed away in 2004 from malignant melanoma and cancer. So she lost her mom at a young age. She was only 23 years old.
That's tough. That's really tough. The only person she's got left in this world is you, and you guys don't have a relationship.
Right. Well, she has a brother, of course, and she has her own daughter now, my granddaughter, who, unfortunately, because of my sequestration, if you will, from my daughter, I haven't been able to have a relationship with my granddaughter either.
That's the question I was going to ask. And this is the part where I would want to say, and I think it's normal to be honest with you, where I want to say, I'm innocent. I didn't do anything wrong, and I need you to admit that. And they're not going to admit that.
No, and most guys, John, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't go to the length that I went to in this case. They if they're lucky to get out of the legal situation above water, if you will, floating, they run in the other direction and never want to have anything to do with this again.
Yeah, I don't know.
I embraced it. I embraced it and took it to another level.
Well, you seem to, like the kind of guy who's got a lot of fight in you. And really, when you're pushed to this extreme, what choice do you have but to come out swinging? Yeah,
and I'm not going to really get into it that much, but to paraphrase what a criminal circuit court judge, right where you are, John, who I testified before in 2017, almost a decade ago in West Palm Beach, said to me, I've had a lot of experts in my courtroom, sir, but I've never had one who went through this experience and then became out on the other side as an expert. So kudos to you for that.
And most people, by the way, and I know this is a generalized statement, but most people, by the way, that go through something so hideous, they would run from it, and they would not embrace it and say, okay, this is going to become my mission. I'll be an advocate.
Yeah. It became basically my life calling, and I had no choice. I had to. It's the only way that I knew to be able to tell the world I didn't do this.
And you see, and by the way, where else do we have to say that I didn't do something? Where do we have to insist on saying that?
Well, everybody in jail, John, is innocent, right?
Of course, I know they are. There's a small segment of the population. Yeah, I'm guilty as charged. You got me. No, those are very rare.
But today, John, when you're convicted of pedophilia or child sexual assault, you're going to be placed in a gang-populated jail cell, jail prison, and perhaps your life is at risk because your new name is.
Well, that's a nice way of putting it. You are definitely at risk, and you're at risk of being killed.
Absolutely.
Did this thought cross your mind when you were doing time? When you're thinking, I didn't do anything. I'm a normal guy. I'm a normal father. I'm going through this stuff, going through divorce. All of a sudden, I'm in jail with the worst label possible.
So going back, John, to the Duval County Jail that I was in Jacksonville, Florida in 1985, in September of 85, I got into a fight with a who was much larger than me. But I could take care of myself, and the police were blowing their whistles. The guards saying that they were going to add charges to me. And like I really cared after I was, accused of and arrested for the most heinous thing known to man and in mankind. And so I didn't care. And we were both bloodied, but I guess I came out on top with this. And they took him to the hospital, and they made me go wash up.
There you go. I get that. We're going to take a short break. We're talking about Tong. Dean was wrongfully accused of sexual assault of his then 3-year-old daughter. He's written multiple books, one of which is called Elusive Innocence, Survival Guide for the Falsely Accused, and his website is abuse-excuse.com. It's abuse-excuse.com. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Look for Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on youtube.com, and be sure to subscribe. Like everything we do, it is free. Look for and subscribe to Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on YouTube, where you'll find great police videos and episodes of the podcast. Best of all, it is free.
The days are longer, the calendar is filling up, and I want to feel as good as this beautiful summer weather. That's why I've been loving Groons. It's one daily pack of gummies that covers my greens, vitamins, minerals, and even has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber, so I don't need to juggle a complicated wellness routine on top of everything else. They taste amazing, they're easy to toss in my bag on the go, plus they're vegan, gluten-free, and HSA and FSA, eligible for reimbursement. Save up to 52% off with code PODCAST at Groons.co. That's code PODCAST at GRUNS.co.
Turn a conversation with Dean Tong on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Dean was wrongfully accused of sexual assault of his then 3-year-old daughter. He was incarcerated, did time in jail, made bail. Eventually, the charges were not only dropped, they weren't pursued at all. He's written a book called Elusive Innocence, Survival Guide for the Falsely Accused. His website is abuse-excuse.com. That's abuse-excuse.com. Check it out. Dean, I look at this, and I'll be honest with you, this is the kind of conversation where I don't know what to say, so I get very quiet. But do you often look back and say that this was then, this is now, I'm a different guy?
Yeah, I certainly do, John. I didn't know, back then what I know now. I didn't know back then that my former self was going to be this guy today. I went on to obtain a Master's of Science degree in psychology and the law and child forensic studies 20 years ago this month in 2006. I went on to become a certified forensic consultant as well as a nationally certified child forensic interviewer. So I'm the guy that now lawyers call basically from all 50 states to review and critique these child forensic interviews that my daughter went through in 1985 for the defense. I go up against these governmental interviewers who oftentimes are well-meaning and well-intentioned but misguided as they're asking the child the suggestive, leading, direct, and
I was going to say
question.
that. Some of these questions are obviously leading, and some of them are isn't this true that this occurred? I almost want to say that way.
Yeah, that's a good point, John. You're spot on. And putting words and thoughts and ideas into the mind and mouth of the little kid. So knowing that, they're looking to get the responses that they're seeking, which is an implication of abuse from the alleged perpetrator, the suspect, so that they can pursue a criminal prosecution.
I look at it this way. I confronted. I did some of these investigations myself. What I wanted to come down was the truth, more of what occurred, and I had to look at the so-called bad guy. Sometimes they were not. They didn't do anything wrong at all, and not only were they did nothing wrong, they weren't that type of people to begin with.
Right. And that's interesting, too, John, because I require all of my clients to go through psychosexual testing when they're accused of sexual child abuse to basically help themselves prove that negative, prove their innocence. Because the first question my doctor, who's my colleague, I've been working cases with him for 20 years now, he's in the Midwest. The first thing my doctor will ask you as the accused suspect, why would the child say that unless it happened?
Yeah.
So it puts the accused on the immediate defense. You better have an answer, and you better not think about it. Now, most men, and of course it's men who are usually accused of this. The only time we hear of women accused of sexual child abuse is usually teachers,
right?
Teachers in school. But most men caught up in this situation, when they're asked by my doctor, why would the child say this? They're not going to say, oh, because the child's a victim of suggestibility, the child's memory has been altered or modified. They're not going to think about that because they don't know anything about that.
Right.
They're going to think about motive. Well, my ex-wife wanted child support. She wanted additional child support. She wanted custody. She wanted this new man in her life. So that's why she did this fatherectomy, this parentectomy.
Here's the thing that I get, and this quite honestly troubles me quite a bit. I was actually off as a sergeant, and my buddy was the officer in charge. There was a then 12-year-old girl named Latanya Wallace who in Baltimore, she was sexually assaulted. She was attacked. She was tied to a fence and gutted like a deer and killed. And to this day, the homicide detectives have a pretty good idea who did it, but they couldn't develop this thing called evidence. And that doesn't seem to be the case with a lot of these parental things. Which
is really disturbing, John, because in Florida, the statute is 90.803, and in parentheses 23. It's known as the 23rd exception to the hearsay rule. And so, generally speaking, hearsay is legally inadmissible.
Right.
Not so here. The excited utterance from a child, or the present tense impression from a child, or a child going to a nurse or a doctor or a therapist, telling that the professional who's a mandated reporter, my dad touched me down there, is immediately going to be reported to the government, to you, John, to DCF, and it's going to be investigated. It's going to be very seriously investigated.
And it should be. I'm just saying this. It should be investigated, but it doesn't mean there's charges going to be levied against someone. And the fact that you were arrested, you were incarcerated, you were jailed, you went through all that stuff, you made bail, and the charges were not even pursued. That right there tells me something's desperately wrong.
Well, remember, John, no disrespect to the state of Florida, this was 1985. This was 40 years ago. The child best interest standard, which we go by today with Children and Family Court, was not even called that back then. Back then, it was called the tender years doctrine, if you recall that, where judges basically automatically ruled on the side of women and children, especially preschool age children like my child.
And then here's the thing. I've had case after case. I understand that this happened to you, but there are so many people where this legitimately happened to them. They were sexually assaulted, they were attacked, not necessarily by family members, but by other people, and nothing happened in court because there was this thing called evidence, and there was a lack of evidence. And so the fact that they came after you as hard and heavy as they did, and there was no evidence to support it, it's kind of like closing the barn door after the cows already escaped.
It's a good analogy, John, and I can't tell you why the Duval County Sheriff's Office did what they did, but they did, and I guess the fact that I had no bail, and then 2 weeks later my bail was reduced to $25,000 speaks volumes.
Yes, it does.
If they had a great case, my bail would have been $200,000 or something. Myself and my family couldn't afford to get me out.
If they had a great case, they had evidence, you'd still be locked up.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of guys are, even today. Clients of mine, and just so you know, John, I work cases with the JAC out of Tallahassee, which is the Justice Administrative Commission, meaning that if someone cannot afford my fees, so long as you're indigent, which means basically you're poor and you can't afford a defense, which is not just a lawyer, but experts such as myself, I will help you and work your case where the state of Florida, ironically, is paying for my work and my time.
And by the way, can people get details about you and contact you at abuse-excuse.com?
Yes.
That's his website, Dean Tong's website, abuse-excuse.com. He's also written multiple books. Are those books there as well?
Yes, they are, John. And the new one coming out is called Parents' Pawns, which is co-authored with a clinical and forensic psychologist. Parents' Pawns, expert advice in navigating false allegations and parental alienation.
Before we wrap up, because we're almost out of time, is there something you would give advice to parents that they can use to protect themselves from false allegations like this?
Yeah, I would, John. Become a cop, but not in the literal sense. Go to Amazon and purchase a $40 body cam, and that's your accountability and transparency for today, especially if you don't have mini video audio cams installed in your home or outside your front door.
You're saying that they should get a body cam and they should wear that all the time in your own house?
In your house, your car,
that's pretty.
In the restaurant, yes. Yeah. I mean, you are one allegation away from where I have been,
and that's the reality that a lot of people face. And I look at it this way, and I really hope that you and your daughter can find some way to get beyond this. I appreciate you coming on and talking about a really, really difficult topic. But I'm impressed with the progress you've made. Dean, thanks so much for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Tell us all about it. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me.
I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or two or three. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.